Hello and welcome to Alyssa Jean's Reviews, and welcome to my latest installment of my Star Trek Top 100. This month I will be covering numbers 50 through 26. If you have not already, please check out my videos for 100 through 76 and 75 through 51. I will have the links to those in the description below. I will also go ahead and put numbers 100 through 51 written out in the description below if you need a little reminder of what those are. So this month is 50 through 26. So we are in the top 50. So there are 700 and whatever episodes of Star Trek. The 100 is narrowing it down. 50 is really narrowing it down even more. I have referred to top 50s before, and I'm like, that makes my top 50. That would never make my top 50. So top 50 in all of Star Trek is a huge, huge deal. Now, I remind you again, this is top 50 based off of my opinion and nobody else's opinion. So it won't always line up with what you think. You may feel free to drop your top 50, top 25, top 10, whenever you want in the comments below of this video or any of my future videos that I do within my top 100. Be curious to see where it lines up with other folks. I know that people have varying opinions on Star Trek, but this is my top 50, and we are covering 50 through 26. These are all great episodes of Star Trek. Now, sometimes you'll hear me kind of explain away why this episode maybe is further back on the list than it would be for other people, but it's still in my top 50. Don't forget, it's still my top 50. This is a big deal. The top 25 is even a bigger deal. That'll be next month. And at the end of this video, I will let you know how I'm going to disseminate my top 25 starting in August. So I'll get into that at the end of this video. It's a little slightly bit different than what I've said before, so stay tuned for the end of the video. Now let's get into my 50 to 26, following the same format from my other videos. I will go through most of the episodes fairly quickly, but I have pre-selected 5 episodes which I will spend more time on, usually about 7 or 8 minutes. I sit there and just really do a more of a deep dive on these episodes. And this month, this is the first time that I'm actually picking one episode from each of the 5 Star Trek Legacy series that qualify for this top 100. In the past, it's been all messed up. There's been 3 of one, 1 of one, 1 of one. Like, it's not been one of each. But this time, the 5 episodes I'm going to talk about is one from each series. So that should be exciting. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into it. I'll start with my number 50, and then number 48 will be the first one that I come back and spend extra time on. So I will see you again at number 48. But first, let's see what my number 50 and 49 are. Okay, let's get this thing kicked off with my number 50, Twilight, from Star Trek Enterprise. Now, if you had asked me a few years ago if Twilight was a top 50 type episode for me, I would have said no. I used to think it was okay, but nothing amazing. I think I was really bothered by the fact that Captain Trip is an incompetent moron. I mean, he's really dumb. And that still bothers me a little bit, but not as much. These days, I am more able to focus on the wonderful relationship and rapport between Archer and T'Pol, and the great chemistry between those two actors. And I'm also focusing, of course, on the fact that this is a pretty amazing alternate timeline story, and I do love my alternate timeline stories in Star Trek. So Twilight in my top 50. Now moving on to number 49, Rocks and Shoals from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Now this is an episode that was probably always going to be in my top 50. It's a part of that 6-episode station takeover story arc at the start of season 6. And it's a really intense, really interesting episode. It's kind of a remake of the 5th season episode, The Ship, in which our crew from the Defiant is trapped on a planet with the Jem'Hadar and the Vorta, but this is a much better episode than that one was. A big improvement. This one really explores the fascinating relationship between the Vorta and the Jem'Hadar, and it's interesting how the Vorta are so quick to throw the Jem'Hadar under the bus, and yet the Jem'Hadar are loyal to the end just because that's how they're built, that's how they were designed. So I found that all really interesting, also really exciting, intense episode. So Rocks and Shoals is number 49. Now let's sit down and have a little chat about my number 48.
Number 48.
All right, let's have a little chat about my number 48, and I will jump right to it. You've seen my username over here. You probably already figured out what it is. So it is from Star Trek Enterprise, and it is number 48, Similitude. So another really great ethical moral dilemma from Enterprise. It's one of the things that they do really well. This is the second such episode that I've talked about from Enterprise. And it's another one where Phlox and Archer are the central characters, just like the one that I talked about in last month's video. So the story here is really layered and complex. And there's actually 2 parts to this dilemma. So the first part is at the beginning of the episode, and that's whether it's even okay to create a sentient life form just to harvest its organs to save Trip. So that is the dilemma to begin with. And then later in the episode, after Sim has grown to a full-grown adult, it's learned that there is actually a chance that they could extend Sim's life beyond the original 2 weeks or whatever. I forget what it was originally, 4 weeks or something, that there's a way to extend beyond that. And now they have to decide the value of Sim's life versus Trip's life. And what really adds to this moral dilemma is just how high the stakes are. There's, of course, the overall stakes of the Xindi story arc that is pressuring them all throughout the season. They got to destroy the Xindi weapon and save Earth. So that's hanging over the whole thing. And Archer feels like he really, really needs Trip alive to have his best chance at defeating the Xindi. So that's part of it. But then there are really high stakes within the episode itself that are very immediate. So the ship is stuck in this like nebula thing, and the ship is rapidly deteriorating. So if they don't get out within 8 hours, there's not going to be any more ship. So there's a great scene where Sim is kind of complaining to Archer and kind of pointing out, oh, so you only care about my safety because I can save Trip. And then Archer retorts, well, if we don't get out of here now, then it won't matter what happens to Trip. We'll be dead. So that was good. This is good stuff. This is really intense. The stakes are ever present. The stakes are high. Now, I can't talk about this episode without comparing it to another ethical moral dilemma in Star Trek, which I like to call a phony moral dilemma, although it has a lot of popularity, and that is Tuvix. Tuvix is an episode of Voyager. I'll put a little picture of Tuvix in case you don't remember what he looks like. Tuvix is the transporter combination of Tuvok and Neelix. Enough of that. Let's get the similitude thing back up here. There. So similitude is Tuvix done correctly. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but I think the main thing, the big thing that really jumps out at me is just how likable and believable the main characters are. So compare Tuvix to Sim. Tuvix is a narcissistic asshole, does not spend 1 second caring about anyone but himself, does not consider the repercussions for Kes, for Tuvok's family, and most importantly, the ship. When Janeway brings up that she really needs her chief security officer and her morale officer / cook, she needs both of them as two separate people because one person can't really do all of those jobs as effectively as two people can. And so she needs them to have the best chance to get back to Earth. So it's all about, not only saving Tuvok and Neelix and reuniting them, hopefully, with their families. Neelix already has his family there. Tuvok has his family in the Alpha Quadrant. It's not only about that, but it's about the whole ship getting back to Earth. Tuvix does not give a flying shit about any of that. It's me. He just is dismissive and hand wavy about all of it. He's a flaming narcissist. And what really bothers me about that is that neither Tuvok nor Neelix are that way. They are both very selfless characters. So in order for them to combine to form this narcissist who does not even spend 1 second to consider anyone else but himself, the way that they combine to form that narcissist character, even though they're both selfless characters, is contrived writing to force feed a phony moral dilemma, or a similitude. By contrast, does this correctly because Sim is a very likable character. You are raised with him as a kid. You get to have affection for him. With Tuvix, I never really cared about that character. He just goes around and goes, ha ha ha, we're having fun. But you never really care. They don't develop compassion for this character, and then he's a narcissist. Whereas Sim, you really genuinely care about this character. You see him as a kid, and you see him grow up really quickly, and you see that he has a bond with Phlox, and he wants to have a bond with Archer, and it's really complex because you really learn to like this character. And he does care about the damn ship, unlike Tuvix. He does stop and think about it. I mean, it's a moral dilemma for him too, because it's his life versus the crew and the ship. And he tries to steal that shuttlecraft, or he thinks about stealing the shuttlecraft, and then he goes down to the shuttle bay. Archer finds him down there, and he hasn't left. And he's like, where the hell was I going to go? And honestly, like, I care about this ship, and like, if it means I have to give up my life, then so be it. So there's such a big difference there that he does actually think about. I'm not saying Tuvix is required to sacrifice himself, although if he were in character with Tuvok and Neelix, he would. But he doesn't even think about the ship at all. And Sim is just such a better character. You have so much more sympathy for him, and he makes a lot more sense as being a clone of Sim, or a Trip, I should say, rather. Sim is a clone of Trip because he has a lot of the same qualities, and of course also shares the same love for T'Pol, which is really interesting as well. So all of that is good. It makes me think, if there was a Sim Lissa, like if they made a clone of me and started from birth and then raised the clone up, the clone would start off as a boy, as I did. Would the clone also be trans? I would say, based on this episode, the clone would also be trans. The clone would just get to transition much, much sooner. The clone could transition like within a week or so of being alive, if there was a Sim Lissa. Anyways, truly great episode of Star Trek Enterprise, showing how to do this particular brand of moral ethical dilemma correctly, unlike Tuvix, which totally was contrived writing and created a character we did not care about. Sim was a great character, and Similitude is a great episode, and it is number 48 on my list. Top 50 is great stuff. Now let us move on to my number 47, through 43, and I will see you back here again for another chat at number 42. All right, at my number 47, Face of the Enemy from Star Trek The Next Generation's amazing sixth season, and season which you will see a lot of episodes appear in my top 50. This is bar none the best Counselor Troy episode of all time. I know a lot of people like to complain about Counselor Troy episodes, and I have been one of those people at times as well. Some of her episodes are really bad, and she is often really annoying in some episodes, but this is not one of them. This is an excellent episode which explores the ins and outs of the Romulans in a deeper way than they've ever been explored before, and this is the introduction to the Tal Shiar, which I often forget because in this episode it seems like they're already an established thing, and Marina Sirtis, I don't care what anyone says, really delivers in this episode, and so it is in my top 50 at number 47. Now moving on to number 46, Azadi Prime from Star Trek Enterprise. This is, of course, a part of that third season Xindi story arc. This is where a lot of people will point to as being the real turning point for the Xindi story arc. This is where it gets really, really good and starts setting up for the end of the season. I believe there's about maybe 7 or 8 episodes left in the season at this point. This is where Archer gets captured by the reptilians. Things are looking pretty bleak. The Enterprise gets its ass kicked by the reptilians. So this episode ends with things looking pretty bad, and it would continue that way, and the episode that airs after this, which is something that you will see later on in my top 50, and I will tell you right now actually that this is the last episode of Enterprise you will see in this video, as there are no more until I get to my top 25. Now at number 45, the plan has failed. Clues from Star Trek The Next Generation. This has always been one of my all-time faves from TNG. This is the best mystery episode in The Next Generation. I've seen it a billion gazillion times, so I know what the resolution is, but I still get a little bit of a thrill every time the big reveal happens, and we find out why Data was acting all weird and why all that weird stuff was happening. I mean, I'm still a little iffy on the time difference at the end, where it's been like 2 weeks now, and shouldn't they be like off kilter from the rest of the Federation and Earth time? But whatever, that's fine, because this is such a wonderful episode and a really great episode for Patrick Stewart solving that mystery as he does. Now moving on to number 44, The Thaw from Star Trek Voyager, an episode that was on my underrated episode list, as I do think this episode doesn't get the credit it deserves, and Michael McKean is, in my opinion, one of the best one-off guest actors in Star Trek history. This performance is on point because this is a really disturbing episode, and Michael McKean makes it that way by his performance as the clown, aka Fear. In fact, I think that if I were to ever do a top 10 most disturbing episodes of Star Trek, this would definitely be on there. I also love the simplicity of the set and how there's just like these creepy masks and stuff in the background, like you can see in this picture here, and not a whole lot else, so it really adds to the creepiness of the episode. And I love the ending where the holographic Janeway goes in there and reveals that she is a hologram and that the Fear, the clown, is about to die, and he says, "I'm afraid," and she goes, "I know." It's so good. So, we move on now to number 43, back to The Next Generation. All hands abandon ship for cause and effect, the OG Time Loop episode. The OG Time Loop story, really, because this actually came out before Groundhog Day, and I still to this day, even though again I know the resolution, love watching how they put it all together and how Data decides to put the number 3 into the next loop so that they all know that Commander Riker's suggestion is the way to go. That was really good. And of course, the episode starts off with the Enterprise blowing up. So what else are you going to do? Such a great episode, and it is number 43 on my list. Now, let's have another sit-down talk about my number 42.
The answer to the life, the universe, and everything. Number 42.
Alrighty, let's talk about my number 42. My number 42 comes to us from Star Trek The Next Generation. And if you can't guess what episode it is by looking at my handle for this portion of the video over there in the corner, let me tell you how to properly pronounce my handle. The way that you properly pronounce it is... So, my number 42 is, of course, Frame of Mind from the sixth season of Star Trek The Next Generation. So, a couple entries back at number 44 with the Thaw, I talked about how that would make a theoretical most disturbing episode at top 10 for Star Trek. This one would probably be number 1, I think, on that list. I think this is Star Trek's most disturbing episode. It deals with this fear that I think a lot of us have, or maybe everyone has, is losing control of yourself, losing control of who you are, losing your grip of reality. And it puts the audience really firmly in Riker's point of view. And by the way, I do have to say, despite the hamminess of that one line that I like to make fun of, "Who are you?" I do think that overall Jonathan Frakes does one of his strongest, if not the strongest, acting performance of his Star Trek career. He is pretty incredible all throughout this episode. And we're put into Riker's point of view. And like Riker, we just want to cling to the reality of the Enterprise crew, what is familiar to us as the audience. Picard and Crusher and Worf. And Starfleet, anything that is Starfleet. When we see a Starfleet officer, we want that Starfleet officer to rescue Riker, and then to see later that she's just talking to a spoon, and then she appears to be crazy. Like, that's disturbing to us. Of course, maybe not after we've seen it, like me, like 500,000 times, but at least when you first see it, it's really disturbing. Although this episode, even after 500,000 times seeing it, it is still disturbing in a different way, even if I know what is coming. Because you just want to cling to Starfleet, and you want to cling to the characters we know. And when they disappear, and they are obviously fake, we know like that. This is very disturbing to us, just as it is for Riker. So that's the brilliance of this episode, is putting us in Riker's point of view. Now, of course, we know rationally that Riker's going to be okay, and he's going to get back on the Enterprise, the real Enterprise, by the end of this. He's not going to be in a mental institution. That's not going to be how this episode ends. It's not going to be Star Trek The Next Generation moving forward with Riker being in some mental institution. He was never really there to begin with. That's not going to happen, obviously. However, even knowing that, we don't actually know how he's going to get to that point. Like, we have no idea, because we keep getting fucked with. Anytime we think he might be safe, he's not. Anytime we think the Enterprise characters are there to rescue him, they're not. They're not real. So it's a ride. It's a thrill ride, trying to figure out, well, how is he going to get back to normal? How are we moving forward? And it is a ride that we go along with. Now, there's all this like glass shattering stuff. Now, looking at it now, the effects are not up to today's standards, but at the time I found it mind-blowing, and I still do, because I'm still able to put myself back in that frame of mind, as it were, of watching this episode in the 90s, and watching it for the first few times and seeing what appears to be Riker's reality, what we really want to be Riker's reality, to just be, just blow up into glass shattering stuff. And where it gets to that point where he has the phaser and goes back to the hospital and he's like, well, how come I still have the phaser? And he shoots them and they shatter the glass. And that's just such a mind fuck moment. It is such like, what the fuck is going on? And it is so good. It is such an amazing WTF moment in Star Trek. Now, I could maybe nitpick the ending, like, what info were they actually trying to get out of Riker, and how does making him believe he's in a mental institution help them to get that information? If you really want to examine it, it's like, it kind of falls apart a little bit, but the episode is so much of a thrill ride and so disturbing and so good in so many ways that's the kind of thing that I just sort of, brush aside and I can forgive that. But if you do analyze it a little bit, it's like, what were they doing? It seems like they're just trying to get him to describe the night that they attacked him. Like that when the doctors are trying to get him to describe something, they're trying to get him to describe the night that they themselves attacked him. So that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But you know what? I don't give a shit. Like, this is still an amazing episode. This is one I think I might have even a little higher than a lot of other people, at least based off of IMDb. I think it's in the 40s just within Next Generation itself. I haven't looked at the rankings on IMDb in a while, but I love this episode. It is a top 50 episode for me, and it is my number 42. So just a couple more episodes to go through quickly, and then I'll see you back here again at number 38. See you then.
Okay, moving on to number 41, The Visitor from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Now, this is an episode that others might have higher up on their list than I do. Many people would probably have this in their top 25, if not even their top 10. And actually, that statement is true for the next 3 episodes I'm about to go through. So I think that maybe I penalized this episode a little bit for being in the 4th season and having that stupid Klingon side plot where they show a future where the Klingons are a big deal and the Dominion isn't even mentioned, and I hate that. However, this is still a great Jake and Benjamin Sisko episode. I think probably the best such episode, and features an incredible performance by one of the best reoccurring guest actors in Star Trek, probably right up there with Jeffrey Combs, and that of course is Tony Todd. So The Visitor, maybe not as high as other people would have it, but still number 41 and in my top 50. Moving on to number 40, staying within Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Duet from the 1st season. So this was the strongest episode of the 1st season and one of the strongest Kira episodes overall. Nana Visitor does a spectacular job all throughout this episode. It is mostly dialogue, but it is a thrill ride. It goes back and forth, you don't know what's what, but it is mostly dialogue, and that's what makes it brilliant. And then there's that powerful ending where Kira realizes that maybe she doesn't hate all Cardassians, and maybe you can look at each person individually and not judge them by their race, which is an extremely powerful message, especially for Kira. Now moving on to my number 39, Balance of Terror from the original series. So my brother and I did a discussion last month on his channel where we counted down the collective fan original series top 10 based on top 10s submitted by his subscribers, and this one came out as number 1. This is not my number 1 in the original series, obviously. I have many other original series episodes ahead of it in my rankings. But it is number 39, and I will say it's a long journey to get this high even. When I was a kid, I found this episode to be incredibly boring. Now, other people have referred to this as a submarine episode, Which explains why I found it boring, because I was also bored to tears by The Hunt for Red October. I actually fell asleep in the theaters watching that movie, and I was a teenager, not like I was a little kid or anything. I guess that genre is just not that interesting to me. However, over the years, I learned to appreciate the complexities of this episode, the comments on racism in this episode, and learn to like it a lot more. But recently, with the Strange New Worlds episode, A Quality of Mercy, this episode has even taken a bigger step up for me. So it is now all the way up at number 39 on my list, even if maybe that's not quite as high as others might have it. Now, let's take a time out and let's talk about my number 38. Number 38.
Okay, let's talk about my number 38. And as I said at the top, I'm doing one episode from each of the 5 Legacy series. So this is the representation from Star Trek, the original series. So my number 38 is Errand of Mercy from the first season of the original series, back when the first season, or back when the original series was doing really powerful anti-war episodes, or pro-peace episodes, I think would be the more appropriate way to describe this episode. So we meet the Organians, who turn out, of course, to be these energy beings who have evolved millions of years beyond us. Spock even says that the Organians are to us as we are to the amoeba. So I want to discuss something that I have said in the past, and I think my brother also has said this. My brother on Enchantment of Eternity, he reviewed this episode, somewhat recently. He's going through all the original series episodes, and I believe he said this too. And I said this in the past, and that's that the Organians kind of cheated with their pacifism, because they're not really nonviolent pacifists, because they're never in any danger. So they kind of cheated. But when I look at it again, when I just did my recent rewatch of it, I'm like, actually, no, they're not really. They didn't really cheat, because that's not actually the point of their pacifism. And I don't think that's even really the point of the episode. So when you go back and watch it, they're saying the whole time, like, we're not in danger. Like, are you okay, Captain Kirk? I'm worried about you. We're fine. He was trying to tell them, like, we're fine. We're not in any danger at all. So the point was not that they are these nonviolent activists or nonviolent pacifists who would do anything to avoid committing violence, even just die. But of course, they can't die because of these energy beings. That's not actually the point of their pacifism. The point of their pacifism is that they will do everything in their power to prevent others from fighting each other. They do not want others to engage in violence. It just really upsets them. It really sickens them. They just cannot stand violence in any other forms. So, and it's not about them being safe from this danger and them being, them cheating because they can't really die. It's about them doing everything in the power to prevent others from having violence against each other, and teaching Captain Kirk that he is a violent being, even though he believes he's not. So I just love how they challenge Kirk on this. The one dude says to Kirk at one point, "So why are you so desperate to get into a war?" And Kirk's like, "Well, I'm not. He doesn't really, but he thinks about it. See the wheels turning. Like, he's like, oh, yeah, like he has to stop and think about it. He doesn't think of himself as a violent person, but the Organians are showing him a different perspective. And then I love the character development for Kirk here. Oftentimes in Star Trek, especially some of its lesser episodes, I'm talking about the original series, in some of its lesser episodes, Kirk is just a dick and he doesn't really learn anything. And I'm thinking of Spectre the Gun, where he's just a complete asshole and he doesn't really actually learn anything by the end of the episode. So it's refreshing to see this really good writing in the first season of the original series, where Kirk really does think and really does learn. At the end of the episode, he says, well, I'm embarrassed. I mean, we think of ourselves as the most powerful beings in the galaxy, so it's a little disturbing to learn that we're not. In this context, when he's saying powerful, I don't think he means like powerful as in, could kill everybody. I think he's talking about just how evolved these beings are compared to them. And so he has to think about, well, maybe they do know a lot more than I do when it comes to violence, and they're just way beyond us. And even Spock, you think of it as logical Vulcan. The Vulcans are all proud of themselves because, we've put our violent ways in the past. Even he is more inclined to violence than the Organians, and that's really cool to see. That is really interesting. Also, I forgot about the mystery aspect of this episode because I've just known what the resolution is. I've known what the secret is for a very long time. But if you don't know, it's really easy to take Kirk's viewpoint to take on Kirk's viewpoint and be like, the fuck is wrong with these people? Why won't they fight back? They're idiots. And that makes it more powerful because you're on Kirk's side, like, these people are morons. But then once you realize, like, oh, we're the morons, so like, and then it can make you as the audience member also kind of think a little bit. So that's really effective in that way, and a very powerful episode. Before I move on, there's a few other little like tidbits I noticed that I took notes on that I just wanted to random things that I just wanted to throw out there. First of all, in this episode, Kirk blatantly offers to break the Prime Directive. Like, this is the most blatant breaking of the Prime Directive I've ever seen. Before he realizes, that the Organians are these energy beings, and he thinks that they're pre-warp civilization, he's offering to, like, build up their schools and teach them and give them and like, what are you interfering with the pre-warp society? And I think the resolution to that is, or the answer to that is, because the Prime Directive is not really a thing yet. It had been mentioned in a previous episode, The Return of the Archons, but I don't think it had been really developed to what the Prime Directive is now. So I think that's why he's saying those things. I don't think the Prime Directive, as we know it today, was developed by the writers yet. Also, there's a line where about Spock, and Spock is going to pretend to be a Vulcan merchant, and he goes, Vulcan merchants are not uncommon. Are they not? So is that logical to go around the galaxy and sell goods and services? Like, kind of to be an entrepreneur? Is that? Seems like it would be uncommon, Spock. But again, the Vulcans probably not as developed as a species as they are now. Also in this episode, the Klingons have this Klingon mind sifter. That's not a thing. That's abandoned after this episode. We never see that again. Another thing I really enjoy about this episode, it's McCoy free. There is no McCoy. It's just Kirk and Spock, and we're free of this. God damn it, Spock, you and your pointy ears. Like, sometimes McCoy can be really annoying. I'm sorry, he can be. So it actually was kind of refreshing to not have him there, nor is he up on the Enterprise with Sulu. Sulu's actually in charge of the Enterprise. Scotty's not even in this episode. And McCoy's not up there, giving Sulu a hard time either, as McCoy free. I kind of enjoyed that aspect of this episode, not gonna lie. So I want to talk about the Klingons. I want to talk about Kor because this is the first appearance of the Klingons. Of course, I can't believe I've gone 8 minutes into this review and haven't mentioned that. And it's where the Klingons become most similar to what the Klingons would evolve into in Next Generation times. Klingons kind of take a wrong turn in the second season, and they're nothing like the Klingons we know now. But he says that line that I have on my username. It would be glorious. And they seem to be, we don't quite get like honor in battle and all of that stuff, but they definitely seem to be driven by wanting to be in battle. So very similar. However, Kor himself, if you look at him outside the context of being a Klingon and just just take a look at him. He looks like the definition of a mustache twirly villain straight out of a 1920s talkie, or a 1920s silent film, with the guy who ties up the girl to the railroad tracks or whatever. That's the origin of the mustache twirly villain term. He looks exactly like that. He looks like the very definition of a mustache twirly villain. Thankfully, he doesn't act like one. He doesn't behave like one, but he certainly looks like one. Okay, I think that is all I'm going to say about this episode. It's going to be a little while before you see my face again. I'm going to do two of these at the very, very end of this video. I'm going to do number 29 and number 26. So we're going to run through numbers 37 through 30 real quick, and I'll see you really soon.
Okay, let's move on to my number 37, A Taste of Armageddon from the original series. So here is the second consecutive Pro-Piece original series episode in my top 100. Also the third consecutive original series episode overall. So this is one that I discussed recently with my brother Mark on his channel Enchantment of Eternity. He's doing his own top 25 1 month at a time. He's doing a discussion video. You should go check those out if you haven't already. This was his number 22, so this is not quite as high for me. Also, I discussed Balance of Terror, which was my number 39, and his number 25, and I have another episode like that coming up fairly shortly here. Now, as for this episode, A Taste of Armageddon, everything that I said in that discussion holds true. This was a really powerful anti-war message, but unlike the last episode I talked about, Errand of Mercy, this time Kirk is the teacher rather than the student, as he shows these funny hat people what's what and demonstrates to them that their refusal to engage in active war and distancing themselves from actual war, the horrors of war, is making it difficult for them to ever want to peace. So it will just go on and on forever if they don't confront the horrors of war. And if they do, maybe they will finally want to make it stop. And it's a really great episode with a powerful message. Moving on to number 36, Homefront and Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Another pro-peace episode, or more like anti-propaganda, showing how easily people can be manipulated into giving up their rights for the name of protection and security. Well, actually, this is just the first part in a two-parter. This one more focuses on the threat, the perceived threat, and why everyone is so freaked out about it. We see a scene with Benjamin Sisko even doubting whether his own father is a changeling because he refuses to submit to a blood test. So it sets us up nicely for the second part, which takes me to my number 35, Paradise Lost. So yet again, I am cheating by putting Deep Space Nine episodes back to back that are a two-parter but have separate titles. I'm actually going to do that again in this video pretty shortly, actually. So Paradise Lost is the one where O'Brien, as you see in this picture, is, well, actually a changeling impersonates O'Brien and approaches Sisko and explains that there's only 4 of them on the whole planet, and they're all freaking out over nothing, and they don't have to really do anything because they can sit back and watch the Federation destroy themselves. And this is a very powerful message that is very prophetic because this took place before 9/11 and all of that stuff that happened after that. So really powerful episodes today, even more so than when they originally aired. Moving on to my number 34, Timeless from Star Trek Voyager. This is the episode I was referring to a couple minutes ago that I also have discussed with my brother and his top 25. This was his number 23. So again, I don't have it quite as high as he does, but I will say that prior to doing that discussion, I had written my draft of my top 100, and this landed somewhere in the 40s. And after I rewatched the episode again for that discussion, I decided, actually, I'm going to bump this up a little bit. This should be in the 30s. Let's put it up at number 34, because this episode gets better and better for me every single time I watch it. I actually didn't think it was that amazing the first time I saw it, but it has really grown on me. I think it is easily the best Harry Kim episode, as it's the only one where he really has any depth of character. It's very fascinating seeing this future version of Harry Kim living with all this regret and what he has to do to change it. So great episode at my number 34. Moving on to my number 33, another great episode here. My number 33, Measure of a Man, from the second season of Star Trek The Next Generation. Only the second episode from that second season in my top 100. There are none from the first season of The Next Generation. So this episode, of course, is known for its dealing with the philosophical debate on the sentience of androids and how much sentience does Data have, how much control over himself should he have, and it is, to me, the greatest trial episode in Star Trek history. Trial episodes are not ones that I typically like. And it also features the second greatest Picard speech, with the greatest Picard speech coming up just a little bit later on in this video. But first, let's talk about my number 32, The Offspring from the Next Generation, which is kind of sort of the sequel to A Measure of a Man. This one also deals with the philosophical debate of the sentience of androids. This time, Data's right to hold on to his creation, which he considers to be his offspring, his daughter Lau, which Starfleet argues that Lau is property and belongs to Starfleet. And of course, in the end, it ends up not mattering because, spoiler alert, she dies. And that ending is the most emotional ending in all of Star Trek. I don't care what anyone says. Like, if you watch that scene where Data says, "I can't feel anything," and she says, "I will feel for the both of us," and you are not just bawling, then I think you don't have a soul. I don't know what else to tell you there. Moving on to number 31, Improbable Cause from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So back at number 77, I had The Wire, which was the first truly great Garak episode. This is the third season, so this episode even takes Garak's character up to another level. And we get these really great interactions between Garak and Odo, two characters who hadn't really interacted that much up to this point. I absolutely love how Odo just cuts right through Garak's bullshit like no other character ever had done before, and the two actors really play well off of each other and have great chemistry. This, of course, is also following up on a previous season storyline where Thomas Riker and the Defiant discovered a secret hidden Cardassian fleet, and we discover what that is for, and that it leads us into my number 30, The Die is Cast. So here is again where I am cheating and putting a two-parter back to back because they have separate titles, and I said I was going to do them separately. The Die is Cast is kind of a little bit of a dark episode because we see Garak torturing Odo, but we see how it actually affects him, and we learn that Garak generally has a conscience. Also, of course, this is when the Dominion has totally pulled the wool over the eyes of the Romulan and Cardassian fleet and completely wipes them out, which is pretty badass. So pretty great pair of episodes at my 31 and 30. Now, let us take a moment, or a few moments, or maybe a few minutes even, to talk about my number 29.
Number 29.
Okay, let's talk about my number 29. And this one comes from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, from the 7th season, The Changing Face of Evil. So this is a part of that end of the series Dominion War story arc that I think is one of the best pieces of serialization that Star Trek has ever done. I would probably put Enterprise season 3 up there as well. And it's hard to rank episodes within those overall story arcs from Enterprise season 3 and from the end of Deep Space Nine season 7 because they're really just one piece in a continuing story, and so you've got to separate them out and rank them. There's also that station takeover arc at the beginning of season 6 of Deep Space Nine, some of which I've already had in this top 100, and some will be coming still. But it's a little bit of a challenge to rank them because of how you've got to just kind of separate them out as an individual episode. But I've done it. It's just that some things have moved around a little bit. Like this one has leapfrogged over the 2 episodes that I just talked about from my original Deep Space Nine rankings. Those were higher. Those were higher than a lot of episodes, actually. There's been a lot of rearranging of things in Deep Space Nine and in Voyager as well. But I'll get into that more as we get through the top 100. But for the changing face of evil, the reason why this is number 29, not too far outside of my top 25 and definitely in my top 50, is primarily for that ending. So I want to start by talking about the ending. There are other things that are great about this episode too, but the ending is one of the best endings in all of Star Trek. And is perfectly placed within this story, the overall story arc, if you want to look at it as a whole, because this is where the Federation is at its lowest. Like, things are looking really bad for them. The Breen have now joined the Dominion. The Breen attack Earth earlier in this episode. It looks like there's not a lot of hope, but hope comes in the most unexpected of places, with Damar giving that speech at the end of the episode. Is so good. Like, every time I watch it, including when I did my most recent rewatch, I gotta rewind it and watch it again and again because it's so good. It's so good. Now, I just want to point out that my username here was not actually said in this episode. I'm kind of taking that from Star Wars Andor, where that lady was like, "Fight the Empire." That sums up what Damar says, although he didn't say the words "fight the Dominion." But it had the same kind of feel. Same. It really got you pumped up, and I loved how he destroyed the Wayun making factory, so there could be no more Wayuns. And I love the scene where Wayun figures that out, like, oh, that could be the last Wayun. It was so good. I love everyone's reaction. I love the female changeling's reaction. I love seeing Sisko, and this is where Avery Brooks actually does a little bit of good acting here. I love seeing just a little bit of a glimmer of hope. He doesn't go over the top, but he says, when he says to Kira, Major Kira, could you verify that this is true? After, Damar has said that he's destroyed such and such outposts, whatever, he says, can you verify that this is true? And he just gets this little glimmer of excitement in him that I love watching. And then this episode ends with Sisko saying, "We've got to go get Damar." And there's finally some hope, because this episode previously was full of not hope. This is also the episode where the Defiant gets destroyed. And if there's anything that makes you feel hopeless, it's the main ship getting destroyed. Now, obviously not the same as the Enterprise getting destroyed, which would happen later. But because, they still have this station, and that's really what the show is about, is a station. But still, it contributes to the sense of hopelessness. I felt it was a little bit undercut when they just all of a sudden had a replacement Defiant, but that doesn't have anything to do with this episode. That was later, so I cannot fault this episode for that. Just looking at this episode individually, it feels pretty hopeless when the Defiant is destroyed, and that's what really helps to contribute to that powerful ending. But all throughout this episode, we have great scenes with Damar and Wei Yun, which we do all throughout this story arc. But that was really well played, really well built up throughout this episode. Now, I also need to mention the Dukat and Kai Wynn storyline. I know it's one that is not well loved by the fandom, and a lot of times I don't like this storyline either, but in this particular episode, I think this is one of the stronger episodes of that storyline because for me, it's all about the turn of Kai Wynn to just being completely evil, because all throughout the show she has been this kind of like faker, like really a phony, basically, like maybe certain real life religious figures, I'm not naming any names, but like pretending to be with the spirit of the prophets and I'm all spiritual, but really being a selfish bastard and being really evil. And in this story arc, she has a slow evolution of just going to be straight out evil and just admitting to herself that she's evil. So it's really powerful. So this was a really big turn in that story arc where her servant dude, the old dude, like figures out that her friend is actually Gul Dukat. And then she ends up killing him. and that's a big turn. And then she finds out that it's Gul Dukat, and at first she's like, get away from him, get away from me, Gul Dukat. But you know what? She just loves him anyway after this. Like, she's still with him after this. So it's so good. So even that storyline, really good in this episode. So the changing face of evil is number 29. And believe you and me, this will not be the last season 7 Deep Space Nine episode you will see. In fact, another one's coming up pretty soon. So let's get into my number 28 and 27. In fact, you might see one right now. So let's go ahead and talk about it.
So here it is at my number 28 of that other Deep Space Nine Season 7 episode, What You Leave Behind. And this is not only a Season 7 episode, but it is the season finale and series finale. And this to me is the second best series finale in Star Trek, with the best series finale coming up later on in this top 100, not in this video, but later on. So all kinds of great stuff in this episode, a really great wrap-up of all of the storylines, especially the Dominion War storyline, and I really appreciated that they had the scene with Admiral Ross and Sisko dumping out the blood wine, because millions of Cardassian civilians had just been killed, and there's no cause for celebration. It really emphasizes the complexities and the horror of war, and that war is never a great thing, even when you win, and I really appreciated that. Also, of course, we have this teary goodbye scene, as you see on your screen, with Odo going off to his people to try to teach them new ways. And we need some follow-up on that. Picard Season 3 didn't really follow up on that. And then I also really love what happens with Sisko going off to the Prophets. I thought it was beautiful. I even liked the Sisko versus Dukat scene. I know not everyone loves that, but I liked it. There is one red mark against this episode, and it is the reason why it got knocked out of my top 25. I originally put this in my top 25, and I was like, Vic Fontaine. I can't have Vic Fontaine in the top 25, so it got pushed back a little bit to number 28. But it is still a great episode and a great finale. At number 27, the Drumhead from Star Trek The Next Generation. And here is that greatest of all time Picard speech I promised you earlier. See, I always promise things later in the video, and I always follow through. So this, of course, refers to that great, powerful scene at the end where Picard uses the words of Admiral Satie's father against her to bring down her witch hunt. And of course, the words themselves are good. Patrick Stewart's performance is amazing, but it's the entire context of this speech, the intensity of the trial at that moment, and the fact that he takes down Admiral Satie, and you see that other Admiral dude walk out of the room because he's seen enough. That's what makes it great. And once again, I know I keep saying this, but another really powerful message in Star Trek, and another one that becomes more relevant after this episode aired, although it had, to be fair, been relevant at various times all throughout our history. That is, of course, this idea of the witch hunt and how easy it is to fool people. So I love how Worf and Picard have that little exchange at the end where Worf is like, I can't believe I was fooled by her, and Picard had that line about how sometimes the worst people can disguise themselves with good deeds, and it's easy to be fooled. So great message, great episode. And now let's close out this video by talking about my number 26.
Number 26.
Okay, let's get into my number 26, which is the final episode in this video, just a smidge outside of my top 25. And it comes from Star Trek Voyager, and it is the 4th season episode, Nemesis. Now, this, of course, is not to be confused with the Krabby movie. This is a powerful Chakotay-led episode in the 4th season of Voyager. Now, before I get into why this episode is so great and why it is so high on my list, I do just have to address the elephant in the room, and that this is on my most underrated, I think it was number 2 or 3 on my top 10 most underrated episodes in Star Trek, because of the fact that there's a lot of hate out there for this episode. Now, let me tell you a little bit about my history with this episode. So I actually didn't really remember seeing it until, I don't know, within the last 7 or 8 years. I may have seen it when it first came on, but I didn't really remember it. And actually, I can tell you what year I saw it. Whatever year Black Mirror Season 3 came out, because there was an episode in that season called Men of Fire, and my brother told me, oh no, this is a lot like the Voyager episode Nemesis. So then I went and watched it, and that's the first time I really remember seeing Nemesis, and I was blown away, just as I was by the Black Mirror episode Men of Fire, which personally I think Men of Fire is a little better, but I think they're very much in that same genre. They're very close to one another in quality. But I was just so blown away by the anti-war message and the anti-propaganda message, just showing how powerful propaganda can be, particularly war propaganda, and how effective it can be to anyone. Any ordinary person can be affected by it. So that message to me was quintessential Star Trek, and I was just absolutely blown away and put it right up there with Errand of Mercy and, Taste of Armageddon and all the great pro-peace or anti-war episodes in all of Star Trek. And then at some point later, I watched a couple more times. I kept watching it because I liked it. And a few years later, my brother and I were doing a discussion about something, and my brother mentioned, yeah, people hate this episode. I'm like, what? What do you mean? What are you talking about? And I looked up on IMDb, and it's really lowly ranked. I think it's last time I saw, I think it was like 100 and something ranked Voyager episode. And I'm like, what? I couldn't believe it. Like, I was completely blown away by that. And come to find out that I think the primary reason that people don't like this episode is reflected in my username. I'm kind of making fun of that a little bit. Is the way that they talk. I'm like, well, how would they talk like that? And they have the universal translator. I don't know. Maybe their speech is so drastically different from our speech that the universal translator can't be exact, and that's the closest the universal translator can do. Who cares? Why does this not matter? Why does this matter to you, but Darmok doesn't? People are totally fine with Darmok. Like, why is the universal translator not translating what they're saying into speech we can understand? Huh? Why does nobody care about that? And the reason way, Darmok is not in my top 100, and I find that to be an overrated episode, whereas Nemesis is an underrated episode. This is because, in the case of Darmok, the whole thing is about the language. That's the whole point of the episode, and language is freaking dumb. Whereas here, who cares about the language? It has nothing to do with anything. How can you overlook the true quintessential anti-war Star Trek episode in a very, very powerful way and just get caught up on this silly language? Who cares about the language? Oh my God. So now what actually makes this episode really great, this anti-propaganda message that I keep talking about, is that I'm noticing a theme. This goes along with the theme of the episodes that I've stopped and talked about. Frame of mind is effective because it puts the audience in Riker's point of view. Errand of Mercy is effective because it puts the audience in Kirk's point of view. And then when you get to the end, you're like, oh, right, you're with Kirk. And realizing, oh, yeah, we're not really, powerful beings, and we maybe are a little more violent than we think. This one puts you in Chakotay's point of view, and it is more powerful than either one of those previous episodes. Probably why I have it ranked higher, because what you as the audience member see are these human people. Yes, they talk funny, but they're human beings that we can relate to, that they're like us. So we automatically want to be drawn to them. There is a lot of parallels you can draw to race. If we are a certain race, we're going to be more drawn to the people who look like us. And that is a problem when you are of a certain race that has all of the power in a society. So there's a lot of little subtle messages, and that we and the audience want to identify with the people that we see that are like us. Whereas this enemy, they call it the enemy, the beasts, it's very, very easy for us to believe that these are the beasts because they look like the goddamn Predator. I don't know how they got away with making these aliens look pretty much exactly like the Predator from the Predator movies, but they do. And of course, our mind is automatically going to go to, oh yeah, these people are good and we sympathize with them, and these are the beasts. And so you can see why Chakotay is so easily taken under. Now, they also do mention that he is on some psychotropic drugs. I think the doctor has some kind of line about like, oh, you were so confused that they could convince you your grandmother was a toaster or something along those lines. I don't know. But even without that, I almost wish they didn't say that, because even without that, like, you can see how a Chakotay would be so easily convinced, because we, the audience, are also convinced. And at the moment where Janeway goes and meets with the ambassador of the good people, and we see the Predator dude, we're like, what the fuck? This is such a mind-blowing moment, such a what the fuck moment, and it is so good. But I also appreciate that they don't necessarily advocate that these dudes, the Predator dudes, forgetting the name of the race, I just watched this episode, sorry, that these dudes are also purely good and the other ones are purely evil. There's a line where Chakotay says something, asks Janeway, like, so do they go around and kill, mass murder people and commit all these atrocities? And Janeway says, honestly, I don't know, but they accuse the other side of doing the same thing. So I love that she says that. So we're not saying that, oh, well, these Predator dudes are actually all good and the humans are all bad. We actually don't know. This is a war. Both sides can commit atrocities. So I really appreciated that they slipped that in there. And then the most powerful line was at the very end, and this can apply to not just war, but you can apply this to all kinds of situations, including racism, bigotry, etc., where Chakotay says, I wish it was as easy to stop hating as it was to start. Oh, so powerful. And you guys are gonna get sidetracked with the stupid "you glimpsed the beast" thing. This is so good, so good, so good. One of the great episodes in the Star Trek franchise. In fact, it's so great that it is number 26. However, I will say that I did a little bit of a flip-flop. When I get into my top 25, you will see a Voyager episode that I actually had at number 5 on my top 20 Voyager episode list, and this was number 4. So I did a little bit of a flip-flop, but it's not because of anything bad about this episode. It was just because that other episode, which you'll see in the next video, that I just decided that I actually liked it even more than I thought I did before. And then I thought that one was really had to be in the top 25. This one is just outside of the top 25. But you'll see what that one is next month. So speaking of that, let me wrap this up. We're all done with this video. And let me just tell you how I'm going to do the next batch of videos. So when I originally announced this, I said that numbers 25 through 11 would be in August. That is still the case, but it's going to be split into 2 videos because I want to do each and every episode from here on out with these long, extended, deep dive reviews that I've been doing for 5 episodes per video. Next time I want to do all of them like that. So originally I was going to do 25 through 11 in one video, but that's going to be like a 3-hour video or something like that. So I'm going to split it up in half. So you can expect the first one. I'm going to say probably try to get it out on August 4th. I'm going on a vacation in August, but I'll probably try to record it before I leave so I can release it on August 4th. That's going to be numbers 25 through 18. So the first part of the 25 through 11 part that I'm doing in August. 25 through 18, and then the following week, August 11th, that is when I will drop numbers 17 through 11. So I'm still doing 25 through 11 in August, just as I said I would before, but I'm going to split it into 2 videos. So it'll be 25 through 18 and then 17 through 11 so that I can spend some time on each and every single one of those episodes the way that I've done with Piece 5 in this video. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining me once again for my top 100. Please check out all the other top 100 videos if you haven't already. And I really look forward to getting into the top 25, the best of the best, the elite episodes in all of Star Trek next month. I will see you then. Goodbye.